Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Tuesday, December 22nd edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by Brian Blessing, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline. Going to talk a little bit at the top of the show about the NHL having a start date. Then we're going to chat some NFL Week 16 with you here on today's program. Over at ATS.io, some very good sportsbook promotions posted for today's NBA action. Opening night across the association. 4 teams in action. You can get any of them at plus 75 over at DraftKings Sportsbook if you sign up for a new user account. Also, if you're a listener in Iowa, DraftKings giving you a $50 free bet if you register through ATS.io. The in-person registration requirement going off the books on January 1st. So if you pre-register now for DraftKings, they'll give you a $50 free bet that you can use either online or with the mobile app. And also sportsbetting.com for those out in Colorado. Triple your deposit bonus here through January 14th. You can read about that over at ATS.io. And of course, you can read about that on the ATS app as well, which we encourage you to download from the Google Play Store, from the Apple Store. You can get direct links to download that app over at ATS.io. It's a bet tracker. It's an odds screen, full article integration from the website. All kinds of great stuff for you to check out. So make sure you download that ATS app. With that, we bring on today's guest. That is Brian Blessing, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline. And Brian, how's it going today, man?
All right, buddy. Merry Christmas to you and all the listeners. And Week 16 NFL and good news on the hockey front. So we're fighting the good fight.
Definitely good news on the hockey front here. January 13th, the start date for the NHL. 4 divisions, a little bit of realignment here as we'll have an all-Canadian teams division. And then, of course, we'll have teams kind of grouped geographically. So, Brian, I don't know if you've had a chance to sort of take a look at, this realigned structure that they're going to have, but do you feel like there are any teams that, kind of get maybe a little bit of a benefit now based on who's around them?
Well, I think I believe by a good margin, the East is the toughest division. You can make a case for everyone in there to make the playoffs. Teams even like the Devils, Rangers, and Sabres, who are on the outs looking in, I think could compete to get into the playoffs. The West is kind of a 3-horse race with Vegas, Colorado, and St. Louis. And if you said regular season, does it really mean something? Winning the West matters because I would think the odds are probably close to 80% that the top 3 are Vegas, Colorado, and St. Louis. So if you win the division, you'd only have to play one of them, and at some point they would probably play each other in the first round, Colorado or St. Louis, and a really good team would be out. So I think you start looking at it that way. The Canadian division or the North, will be good fun. I think, the passion in the games up there will be really interesting. The one thing that does happen, it guarantees a Canadian team makes the semis, which is never a stroke on the board. And then the Central, Tampa Bay is clearly the class. They're 7-5 to win the Central. And I think there'll be a pretty good dogfight. I think Carolina and Dallas get in. And then a nice fight there between Nashville, Columbus, and Florida. Unless Dallas maybe has a little regression going through that bubble and the Stanley Cup hangover. But it'll be interesting. I think the cool thing about the games and from the handicapping perspective, exactly how they're going to do it, we're waiting to see. But the word is we're going to have countless back-to-back games, 2-game series, 3-game series. There's reports that are even a handful of them. Teams are going to play 4 games in a row. They're going to be doing stuff to mitigate travel as much as they can. So you have a lot of back-to-back games, a lot of intensity, a lot of hate buildup. And the one thing I would also say, the backup goalies are going to play less games numerically, but they're going to play a higher percentage of games in a 56-game season. So you better have a good backup goalie to make sure you get into the playoffs.
No, absolutely. And as we look at how the schedule is going to break down here, the teams in the East, Central, and West, all the United States teams, they'll play their division opponents 8 times each In the North Division, which is the All-Canadian division, as you mentioned, there are only 7 teams there. So you'll play some teams 9 times, some teams 10 times. So if you're somebody who plays maybe a team like Ottawa more often than you play one of the better teams in that division, maybe that gives you a little bit of an advantage depending on, again, if you get Ottawa 9 times or 10 times, something like that. Top 4 in each division make the playoffs, which means 4 of the 7 Canadian teams will make the playoffs, 4 in each of the other 3 divisions. And like you said, from a handicapping standpoint, I think it should be really interesting because, again, playing the same team 8 times with this condensed 56 game schedule, that's going to lead to a lot of interesting adjustments from an odds standpoint based on what happens in that first game, back-to-backs, rivalry factors, and also, too, a lot of familiarity coming with these teams. So it'd be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, where teams evolve from where they start to where they kind of finish up.
Yeah, and I would think it may, and you'll see how the games are being played and what these matchups are going to look like, where you really can utilize the eyeball test. But I think you'd have maybe an impact a lot on totals in terms of, like you said, there's some familiarity there, and the teams knowing how to defend and take away some of the things that other teams do well. You're playing them a lot, so maybe you see a few more unders than we'd normally get. The other thing is the intensity. It's a sprint. These games will be really physical. They're going to have a taxi squad of 6 guys. I would think the intensity in these games, just because you're playing the same team. I mean, we only get a handful of them during the year and used to look forward to them, or, a little bad blood build up. But then teams would hop on a plane and go to the other building, and we get all excited about that. These guys are going to go back to their home or / hotel, turn around and come back and do it the next night. The one thing Gary Bettman may get out of this that I know he's not a big fan of, there may be a lot more fighting in the NHL this year.
Yeah, that could definitely be a thing. Training camp starting on December 31st for the 7 teams that were not in the qualifying round in last year's bubble. For the other 24 teams, January 3rd. And then, as I said, the starting date, January 13th, no exhibition games. So we'll see how sloppy and kind of disjointed things are right out of the gate. Trade deadline, April 12th. So that'll be an interesting thing with the end of the regular season on May 8th. So as we get closer to the year here, Brian and I will have plenty to talk about on the NHL side, and also how we're going to sort of handicap, our expectations of what this thing may look like. Brian, before we transition over to week 16 here in the NFL, I got to ask you about week 15. The Rams lose to the Jets. The Steelers lose to the Bengals on Monday Night Football. First time since I think I saw 1973 or something like that, that two touchdown or more underdogs won in the same week. Things are getting, very interesting here in the NFL in terms of the playoff push with that extra playoff spot, something that's creating a lot of drama.
Well, and, you get the Steelers dropping like a rock here a little bit, and they look really disjointed and off their game against Cincinnati to the point, and I'm not making too much of it, but Buffalo moves up to be the 2 seed now in the AFC. And then the battle in both conferences to see who gets in is going to be an interesting little stretch here. The one thing I would say, and we said this all year long, and we've reached that point, will there be some teams even starting this week that start to rest guys? Basically Kansas City, Green Bay, let's say they've got the buys. And the bottom line is, okay, you're 4 seed, you could go up to a 3, or, if you can move up the ladder. I just don't know, especially in the AFC, that it makes that big a difference. Because, what's the difference between playing Tennessee, Cleveland, Indy at this point? I think all those teams are dangerous, and you're going to have a tough test in the first matchup. And I would even say Miami, with that defense, the way they're playing, and look out. Baltimore, you would say Baltimore likely gets in, but not necessarily. In this rest scenario, if Miami were to beat the Raiders, they're going to play Buffalo in week 17, and the odds are pretty high that Buffalo's locked in as the 2 seed. going against that defense, Miami may end up playing a lot of Matt Barkley in week 17. So, and Baltimore now, as of today, I don't know the last two. Miami currently holds the tiebreaker. If that tiebreaker holds for 2 more weeks, but the point is, some of these teams are going to be trying to get in. They may be playing some teams that are resting guys. And I think the Bills, you say, for argument's sake, you play the Bills in the first half against the Patriots. Patriots are deflated. Bills always start fast. They've been a license to print money in the first half. I mean, it's been ridiculous. And you get to the second half. I think Buffalo's going to want to say, well, hey, listen, all these years, we won the division, but I think they'd love to, drive the stake into the heart of the Patriots too and say, hey, yeah, well, we'd have done it ourselves anyway. But if the Bills are up big in the first half, I was holding my breath in the Denver game. I was saying they should have got Allen out of there at the start of the fourth quarter. And sure enough, there was a play where Devin Singletary reverse field, and Allen's standing there, and the guy comes flying over Singletary to tackle Singletary and chops Allen down. Allen thankfully saw him and he was up in the air when he got hit, but if his leg was down, he'd have blown his knee out. I mean, like, what are you doing? Get these guys out of there. And then Diggs got hurt, by the way, in a series he shouldn't even have been on the field. So I think there's going to be a lesson learned by a guy like McDermott and other coaches. I really think you're going to have to watch very closely some of these teams resting guys, and it starts this week.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And I also think it's kind of crazy that we added a playoff spot in the AFC this season, and there's going to be probably a 10, maybe even an 11-win team that doesn't make the playoffs, which is absolutely astonishing. I guess it speaks to how bad the bottom of the conference is in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I mean, you're looking at a Baltimore team that could very well, finish 11-5 and not make the playoffs because Miami has that tiebreaker. So definitely a lot of moving parts in the AFC, a lot of moving parts in the NFC as well, where, it certainly does feel a lot top heavier than the AFC does. Although I think the Rams are a very, very strong 5 seed out there in that conference.
Oh, I say watch out for Tampa. I really do. It's funny how they were the buzz and the belle of the ball, and then they had a couple of off weeks, and you had a little soap opera with Arians and Brady, and nobody's talking about Tampa Bay anymore. And I'm not saying they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but every week Brady gets to know these guys. Brady's got playoff experience, and oh, by the way, slowly now, Antonio Brown is getting to know the offense and get back up to speed and starting to contribute. I think Tampa Bay is actually a very dangerous team in the NFC that I don't think a lot of people are talking about.
We'll get back to Tampa Bay in a second. I want to talk about this Christmas game on Friday here between Minnesota and New Orleans. Saints laying 7. Drew Brees returned last week, looked a little bit rusty, didn't have his top target in Michael Thomas, of course, as we all know. Minnesota, pretty inexcusable loss for them. They fall behind the Bears now. They're the 9th spot right now in the NFC. Their playoff hopes are pretty much all but dead here for the Vikings. But you still have a Saints team here laying a touchdown on a short week in a little bit of a difficult spot coming off that game against Kansas City. Any thoughts on this Christmas afternoon contest, Brian?
Yeah, I like the Vikes. I like the points. I think New Orleans, I'm not saying that massive a letdown. There's no disgrace in losing to the Chiefs. But, now they know, for the most part, it's Green Bay's going to get the bye. So I think when Brees came back, the majority of stuff he got, Adam, came at the end of that game when Kansas City was kind of in that protect mode and playing the clock. And by the way, Kansas City just continues shockingly to win game after game after game, but burn the bettors' money. It ended up being a push. But there was no Michael Thomas. Short week. I don't know that Thomas plays here. And that was the one thing that before Brees went out, he and Michael Thomas wasn't part of the offense. Taysom Hill started to get him more involved again. That would be the biggest thing for the Saints, is to get Brees and Thomas with a little bit of rhythm. But I can see the air being out of the balloon a little bit for New Orleans, and knowing that the bye is likely gone, and they're good, they're fine, and they'll have their opportunity to regroup and get it going. But I think even though they're technically, it looks like they're toast, I could see Minnesota, circling the wagons for one good final effort here I like the points.
Minnesota dropping 5 in a row against the number. And this is one of those things where they had a period earlier this year where they covered 6 out of 7 games. And we were kind of watching this play out in the betting market that Minnesota was getting overvalued. Their price was getting inflated. Now it's kind of come back to earth a little bit where they have dropped 5 in a row. I was on the Vikings last week in the Circa because they were a 3-point favorite on the road against the Bears about a month or so prior. Of course, we all know how that game played out this weekend. They didn't have their best showing. But that's sort of the question here. And this is kind of always the question in the NFL. Was that more of a commentary on Minnesota, maybe, just not being as good as they were in the middle of the season, maybe kind of bottoming out a little bit? Or has Chicago just kind of figured something out with back-to-back really good offensive performances for Mitch Trubisky and Matt Nagy? So that's kind of the thing you have to figure out with Minnesota. And it sounds to me like you're just ready to give the Bears maybe a little bit of credit.
Yes, I'd be more inclined to say the Bears are, as flawed. Flawed is the word. Maybe just the expectations were always unfair with the guy. But they're night and day, the Bears, better with Trubisky at quarterback than what they were getting out of Foles. And that defense can, make plays. So, Chicago's got a little push here. Oh, by the way, Chicago, they play the Packers in week 17. Real good chance who knows if Rodgers even plays in that game in week 17. But if you're Minnesota, you're looking at Arizona above you, who has 2 division games ahead of them. Minnesota says, hey, wait a minute. Long shot, yes. But I would think Minnesota says, this is our playoff game. If they beat the Saints and can make it to week 17, they've got the Lions, and then they hope for the best that they get help from above. And when you sit there and say, you're throwing darts, it happens every year where, some wacko scenario comes into play in week 17. So until they tell you you're going home, you're not going home.
Speaking of Chicago, as we fast forward to Sunday here for a second, they're laying 7.5 on the road, total 47 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars did not play like the Jets this past week. And the Jaguars played like a team that, didn't seem all that invested, even with Gardner Minshew back. They get run off the field by the Ravens. The Bears, again, off of back-to-back impressive offensive performances. But can you lay 7 and a hook here with Chicago on the road?
It's not one that's on my radar. I'm staying a mile away from this one just because of that. I don't know what I'm going to get from Jacksonville. The last 2 weeks, here's the point. They lose badly, but they lose to Tennessee and Baltimore. Well, the Bears aren't Tennessee or Baltimore. So are the Bears good enough to be, like you said, be laying those kind of points to anybody, anywhere? And, for me, it's not one I'd go near. There's too many question marks.
Well, I said we'd circle back to Tampa Bay here, and this was a line mover on Monday morning. This one was 7.5, got bet up into the 9.5 range, with the Buccaneers laying a very healthy number on Saturday at Ford Field. Total 54 for this one, and credit to Detroit. They came and hung around for 3 quarters against Tennessee before they just kind of wore out in the fourth quarter, and I believe they got outscored 22-0 in the fourth quarter. Titans with an easy cover in that one. What do you see from this game where, Stafford continues to be a leader? Seems like Detroit plays relatively hard, but they just don't have any talent on the defensive side of the ball.
No, and they're toast on a stick. And if Stafford, he's literally the first play of the game away from getting knocked out of the game. Give him credit. He's out there playing hard. Tampa Bay gets a little squirrely at times. You're like, what's going on with these guys? They looked horrible for a long time against the Falcons, and then they put it together. I think Tampa Bay comes in here with a sense of purpose and maybe puts the Sasquatch foot on them pretty good. But I would think, again, the fear of, can Stafford hang in there the whole game? But I would envision a game like this, one team trying to fire on all cylinders going in, and a team that's loose as a goose and out of it, that is capable of going up and down the field on occasion. I would probably, look at the points. I'd probably look at the game going over the total. I'd look for points scored in the game.
Yeah, that's where I was thinking too. And, also you get Tom Brady in that controlled environment of Ford Field on a fast track with his wide receivers. That's probably a pretty good scenario for Tampa Bay. And, again, we've seen some decent offenses put up some points on Tampa Bay. Obviously, the Falcons kind of sputtered in the second half, but they were able to score in the first half of that game. Minnesota had 10 missed points from Bailey. Otherwise, that game's a lot closer. And Kansas City racked up over 540 yards, but only managed 27 points. So teams have moved it on that Tampa Bay defense. I think you're on the right side of that one there with the over. What about 459, 460 on Saturday? San Francisco, Arizona, 4.5 now we're up to, with Arizona a home favorite. And of course, they need the wins. They control their own destiny there in the NFC for what is likely to be the final playoff spot in that conference. Total coming down on this one from 50.5 to 48.5 or so. I guess the question here is, just sort of looking at San Francisco, they're 5-9. They've put up with COVID and injuries and bad play at the quarterback position. Do you think Kyle Shanahan's team has any interest in playing spoiler this weekend?
I can't give you an answer, because I thought San Francisco, I was dead wrong on that game with Dallas. I was wrong, but I wasn't. I watched that game. I thought San Francisco was going to be a mad football team, take it out on Dallas. They came out, they got the ball first. Third down, move the chains. They get the midfield. Just an easy pass you and I would have caught. Tight end drops it. They punt. Dallas scores. Then Dallas punts. The Niners guy fumbles it. They hand the Cowboys 14 points right out of the gate. Then they fought back, and it was close enough. But they just dug themselves such a hole. Now, I think in Mullins, 1 week, some of the throws he's making, but I think he ended up getting nicked up. I think a real chance you're getting Beathard here. Another one, Arizona's clearly got something to play for. San Fran doesn't. But San Fran's capable of moving the football on the ground. I don't trust, again, either team. I kind of trust the way they play, and that would be another game indoors. I would think it's a game that could produce points. There's always something about, to me, if one team's in, one team's out, then you try to figure out who's going to dictate the pace of the game. But I got a funny feeling it's kind of a mini shootout. And I would say the same thing in the other NFC West game, the Seattle game. The first time they played was 23-16. Everybody goes, and then the Seattle struggled to produce points against Washington. Well, that's a good young Washington defense. So he said, well, that'll be a low-scoring game. But, don't forget that game that was played November 15th, you had no Chris Carson, you had no Carlos Hyde. So Seattle had no running game. Russell Wilson, as good as he is, was one-dimensional. He didn't throw a touchdown. He threw 2 picks. One was a pick six. Now they've got a running game with Carson and Hyde, which means the play action opens things up. And I think that's a game, even though it's a huge football game, I think the preferred style for both of those teams is to go up and down the field, and I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I like the Rams a little bit in that game as well. I mean, I know that they just lost to the Jets, and, obviously that's one that should never happen. But, I mean, that's a classic case of a look-ahead spot. We think that look-ahead spots exist all the time. Sometimes they play out, sometimes they don't. That one absolutely did. And for Seattle, playing that tough physical game against Washington, where they also coasted through the fourth quarter, much to my chagrin, having Seattle in the Circus Sports Million this past weekend. But, they kind of took the fourth quarter off, started looking ahead a little bit to the Rams themselves, wound up, in a game that was a lot closer than they probably expected it to be. So really, I think you could look down on both of those teams from last week's performances. I just look at the Rams, and look, I've said on this show that I think the Rams are the second best team in the NFC, and I'm not ready to back off of that position yet. And I think maybe there's a chance that they do show it here this week. So I kind of like the Rams. I mean, I don't know if I'll mess around with the 1.5 or just kind of take the money line there and see what happens with that one. But I do agree with that line coming down a little bit here early in the week on the side as well.
Well, I'm going to go with the buyer beware thing on the Rams a little bit and say, because I had said the same thing, that, the Rams with Donald and Ramsey, they've got the better defense. I still think they have the better defense, but I think it's a slightly better defense now because Seattle was getting gashed week after week. But Seattle's defense playing some pretty good football now. Since they got Carlos Dunlap, and in fact, Dunlap comes up with the game-saving play against the Redskins. he has been flat out, and you don't see trades in the NFL too often. That has been an incredibly impactful trade since Carlos Dunlap came over to Seattle. That defense is playing good, and Jamal Adams is flying around the football field. Don't sleep on Seattle's defense. It's not what it was in the first half of the season. This is. I think either one of these teams can string something together in the playoffs, and I do say the Rams are the slightly better defense. But I mean, who do you trust more, Russell Wilson or Jared Goff? Because Goff can light you up for 350 one week and throw 3 picks and do some of the stupidest stuff you've ever seen the next week. So I trust Russell Wilson a lot more than I trust Jared Goff.
No, that's fair. And of course, we'll have to see what the weather looks like up in Seattle for this one too, where, Jared Goff is a guy that can thrive under optimal conditions, no pass rush, good weather, all of that. If Seattle finds a way to get some pass rush here, and of course, if the weather's bad, then, you do worry about Goff a little bit more. Moving back to Saturday here, the late game, Miami and Vegas. Miami 2.5 with extra juice, or 3, 47.5 the total for this one. And, the last few data points for the Raiders have been very, very poor, to say the least. But they're only a 3-point dog here, which I think speaks to kind of the respect for the offense, the respect for that statistical profile. What do you think about the game, Brian?
Well, what I think, I'm sure a lot of people could care less about, and specifically the Dolphins, but I watched that game with the Patriots, and you could tell that was a field goal game, and every point mattered, and they get the ball third down at the 4-yard line, late first quarter, and Tua gets blitzed and rushed, and he's getting sacked, and he just throws a wild pass to the corner of the end zone. He gets picked. It could have been a pick six. He gets picked off. So instead of being up 3-0, now they find themselves down, and the whole game changed on a dime. Now, Miami came out at the start of the second half and imposed their will, went down, got the lead. That defense is so good. I think Miami is making a huge mistake here. Yes, the future for Tua. He's your guy. And I don't know how you go back on this. And the crazy thing is, I've spent my entire life, Ryan Fitzpatrick drives me nuts, But the level he was playing at, I think Miami's really running the risk of squandering an opportunity this year by doing this with Tua, because I think they'd have won the game handily against the Patriots comfortably if Fitzpatrick was playing. The Tua doesn't stretch the field. It's a lot of running around, and he's going to be fine. I get it, but with the way that defense is playing, I think this is a very dangerous team if Fitzpatrick were the quarterback. As for this week, this may be the worst thing that ever happened, and to get a false security blanket here, because the Raiders' defense is so bad, Tua's probably going to look pretty good in this game. The Raiders secondary, they're a mash unit. The Raiders mathematically aren't eliminated yet. 47.5 is a pretty high total with that Miami defense. The problem is Miami's defense can actually put points on the board themselves. I don't like the game. I'd be honest with you. I think I would lean Miami's way, but I come back to I just don't trust Tua to be able to. If for some reason the game were to open up and turn into a mini shootout, I don't know that he's the guy that can keep pace. And Carr and that offense, the Raiders can score. It's just the fact that their secondary has just been a disaster. Can Tua take advantage of it?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question. And furthermore, Tua and the Dolphins have left a lot of points out there on the field in the red zone. Ever since he took over, whether it's the play calling or just the execution, that's been problematic for the Dolphins. And initially last week, I liked the Dolphins. We talked about that game here on the show. I know everybody ran through that stat about Belichick against rookie quarterbacks and all of that. And, for the most part in that game, he did befuddle Tua, but that Miami defense able to win the day. And Miami also, as you mentioned, able to kind of assert their will a little bit in the second half. I don't have that same feeling for Miami here this week. This is a no play for me, just not a game I'm super interested in. So we'll move to Sunday here. And I think one of the big storylines from a betting standpoint here, as far as Sunday goes, is that, Pittsburgh was thought to be, a 2.5 point favorite against Indianapolis on the look aheads, kind of in everybody's mind. And then last night happened, and Pittsburgh loses outright, looks awful in the process. Big Ben looked atrocious in that game. All over social media, court of public opinion writing off Pittsburgh, to say the least. Now Indianapolis, the clear-cut favorite at Heinz Field.
Yeah, and in Indianapolis, honestly, well, Pittsburgh's got to play too because Cleveland's right there, so it turns into a monster game. But, Indy was kind of my pick before the season started to be the one that could maybe upset the card a little bit and come out of the AFC. And again, I really make a case. Specifically, I do think if Buffalo continues to play the way they're playing, I would make the case maybe the main danger for the Chiefs, but they could also stub their toe because any one of these teams can beat you. But Indy's got a running game. Rivers is doing a much better job protecting the football. Can he do that against this aggressive secondary? But I look at Indy and Tennessee as teams, specifically Rivers at Indy. Tennessee played last year, made it to the championship game. I think Cleveland, there's got to be a bit of a learning curve, to get there, have that experience of being in the playoffs, and they learn from it. But Indy's a team I could see making a run. I really can. Can Pittsburgh? I would say the under, because this Pittsburgh defense can fly around and can make big plays. And this might be the kind of game where Rivers has a turnover or two, and Roethlisberger just seems off kilter. And he it's funny, they were saying on the Monday night broadcast, Roethlisberger said, I want to come back and play another year. And I'm watching the game and I'm going, okay, well, good luck with that. Because the one thing he's doing, and I understand why he's doing it, is he can't take these shots anymore. So everything he does is just a dink and dunk and underneath thing. And then occasionally, he'll throw the bomb over the top to Devontae Johnson or James Washington. There's a chance, right? I believe Connor's coming back. And I thought Snell played fine. That game wasn't on Snell. He ran hard for the Steelers. If I had to play the game, I could see Pittsburgh being, and they say they're pissed off. They're a mad football team. I'd probably lean to the under a little bit. Would be if I had to play the game, that's where I'd go.
Yeah, this is one. Look, it's shaping up to be a decent teaser play on Pittsburgh, I guess, if you trust their offense. Low total, you can tease through that 3-7 corridor. The thing for me with Pittsburgh is that, I've talked about this a few weeks, and I wish I would have continued this fate of the Steelers, but, that offense has been average all year long, and now it's become a below-average offense. The defense carried them early in the year. Then they started losing guys to injury. They lose Dupree. They lose Spillane. They had another guy go down yesterday in the game whose name escapes me right now. That defense that was really good is now starting to use a lot of second-team guys, and it really lessens the margin for error offensively, and they need a high margin for error on offense because they just don't move the football effectively. So I'd have to look Indianapolis or nothing here at this point. I don't know if I can fire on it. I don't know about Rivers in a close game and all of that, but a lot of interesting storylines, to say the least. Speaking of interesting storylines here, no lineup for Carolina and Washington, but this coming across the wire. Alex Smith still dealing with that calf strain. Dwayne Haskins goes to the strip club without a mask on. So now Haskins
you gotta be kidding.
Either facing a fine for the game or a 4-game suspension. So we'll see. I don't know if it falls under the purview of the NFL or under Washington, but not a great look for the second-year quarterback.
So this is the guy you draft in the first round to be the franchise quarterback and be a leader, and he does that. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So, and he's getting an opportunity through injury to I won't say salvage his career. He's a kid, but to maybe make a case for himself. Well, he just made the case, didn't he?
Yeah, definitely not a good case. And again, no lineup on that game right now. Got some injury situations really for both teams, but especially that injury situation on possible suspension situation now at quarterback for Washington, who, they need that game here coming up this weekend. So, we'll see what they wind up doing there at the quarterback position. But Brian, looking at the rest of the card here for Sunday, Atlanta and Kansas City is intriguing because, again, here we've got Kansas City laying double digits where they just don't seem interested in doing anything other than winning and, worrying about the bottom line. They are not covering spreads as a favorite and have certainly had issues covering some of their bigger favorite roles this season.
And again, what Andy Reid will do here, I can see Kansas City, covering this game in the first half. But, the point is exactly what we were talking about earlier. At the tail end, now, obviously the game was in doubt, but at the tail end of the Saints game, you lose Edwards-Helaire to a high ankle sprain, and then Bell looked like he kind of hyperextended his knee, but he got up, and I think he's okay. But Kansas City, they start resting guys. Okay, listen, man, we got the bye here. Let's get healthy. So I'd be very leery of the backdoor cover. We got to check the weather in Kansas City. Get pretty gnarly at Arrowhead. But if I was diving in on this game, I'd be doing something in the first half, because I think that's what you can trust. What you're going to see guys out there in the first half, but the second half to me is just such a gray area.
It's pretty hilarious that I'm going to call this a square position, but you've got a Kansas City team, arguably the most public team in the NFL right now, but they're just not covering double-digit numbers. They did it against the Jets. They did it earlier in the year against New England. That one was a little bit precarious as well. Didn't do it against Vegas. In fact, lost the game at home outright against Vegas. Didn't do it against Miami a couple weeks ago. Didn't do it against Denver a couple weeks ago. Like you said, they play very well in the first half, first three quarters, and then if they need a score in the fourth quarter, they find a way to get it. It's square as hell, but I like Atlanta catching double digits here because I think there are two things that are interesting about this game. The first is 4 of the last 5 have been on the road for Kansas City, and they've won those games by 4, by 3, by 6, and by 3. So this is a team that I think has to be maybe a little bit tired coming into this game where they can rally for that Week 17 game against the Chargers if it actually matters. The second thing is, I know that the Falcons have plenty of issues. They have issues on defense. They can't hold leads. They blow games in the second half, so on and so forth. Well, A, I don't need them to hold a lead here. I just need them to keep the game close. And B, they play really hard for Raheem Morris. And I think that you can kind of look at these next 2 games as a thank you to Raheem Morris, who will not get the job full-time. At least I don't think so. They're playing the reigning Super Bowl champions and then playing Tampa Bay in the rematch game in Week 17, where I don't know if the Buccaneers will have anything on the line necessarily or not, but they should show up for these last 2 games and play pretty hard. So I like Atlanta. Again, I think it's very square, even though it's against Kansas City. It's very square to be on a public dog sometimes, but I just don't see Kansas City being super motivated this week. I just really don't.
Well, just like I hate the word value, I hate the sharp and square thing in pros versus Joes. The sharp money, you'll know better than anybody. Not that I'm saying you were doing it, but for the last 4 years, well, they're finally there now. But for the last 4 years, the sharp money was on the Cleveland Browns week after week after week, and it's just like taking money and burning it. All that matters to me, is it a winner or is it a loser? I mean, who cares, who bet what?
All right, so let's see what you think.
That's a me thing. That's a me thing. It's like me with analytics, too.
No, that's fair. I mean, that's fair. At least you're consistent with it. A lot of people just kind of waffle back and forth whenever it fits their narrative, whenever it makes sense for them to use it. But you're consistent with it all the time. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. We're certainly allowed to have a difference of opinion.
No, that's absolutely true. And I don't know. Honestly, I'm trying to think, is that actually a square thing to take those points? I don't know. And the funny thing is, when everybody's going to sit there, okay, we've watched this for 5 weeks now. In Kansas City, just goes through the motions, blah, blah, right? The minute everybody gets off the train, they go and win a game 52-10.
No, that's fair. And it's certainly a possibility with that Atlanta defense, which has been better of late, but, still certainly a lot of holes. a lot of flaws with that unit. Want to talk to you about the two primetime games to finish up here with today's show. Tennessee, Green Bay. Green Bay, 3.5 or 3 with extra juice. Total 56, mostly across the board here. Starting to see some 56.5s pop out there in the marketplace as well. So a lot of points expected here at Lambeau Field on Sunday night.
Yeah, and I look at that and I kind of giggle a little bit, and I can't do it. I like the under in the game. Listen, it's a Sunday night game. I checked the weather. The high's 28, but at night it's going to be 18, 19 degrees when they play this game. Who knows whether it's blustery or windy by the time we get there. And I know this Tennessee defense can be really, really quirky and goofy and not get off the field on third down. The safest play you can make in this game are find the player props and play Davante Adams over anything you can find. Because against Carolina, it was the first week Davante Adams was not invisible, but he had 42 yards, I think. I'm telling you, the best bet in this game is Davante Adams is going to get a touchdown. Davante Adams is going to have over 100 yards. He's not going to have a back-to-back quiet week. That's not going to happen. But I do believe the weather, to me, just the cold environment, and we are getting close to the playoffs, and you want to get that style going that's going to be successful. And we saw Green Bay against Carolina. It was kind of a close to the best game. I think you see a ton of Derrick Henry here. And I just think it's a lot of points, and it's mostly the weather. It may threaten it. It could get, they could go over. But I see the field goal kickers maybe having to be a little busy here. Teams moving it between the 20s, not necessarily getting it in the end zone. But I like Adams props over, and I like the under in the game.
Yeah, and as I look at this, I just ran the query in the killersports.com database. One game since at least 1995 at Lambeau Field, week 13 or later, with a total over 53.5. That was back in 2014. It was a Packers-Falcons game. Finished 43-37, flew over the total of 56, but that speaks to what you're saying. This is an historical outlier in terms of December games at Lambeau Field. So this is one to me where I understand why the total is high. Both of these offenses very efficient. A lot of people don't like the Tennessee defense. A lot of people very skeptical of the Green Bay defense. I understand all of those points, but as you said, this is an historical outlier. And generally speaking, you don't make money playing on historical outliers like this. So I'll be curious to see what happens with the total. Again, weather forecast.
I'm surprised the total went up, buddy. I thought for sure I'd do a video at the beginning of the week, and where we project the totals were. And maybe it still will. But okay, here I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I'm not saying when we see it was a square play, but I did say though that I thought sharp money would drive this total down, and it may still, but at least now you're saying some 56.5s are popping up. I'd envision the closer we get to the weekend, I think cooler heads are going to be prepared, colder heads because it's Green Bay. I think this total probably comes down to about 54.5, 55.
Well, again, when I look at this from even a total of 50 or higher, only 7 games previously, week 13 or later up at Lambeau Field with a total in the 50s. So again, we'll see if this one winds up being the offensive shootout the line projects it to be. What about the side? What are you kind of looking at there in terms of a Tennessee team that has found its offensive footing again, defense still pretty weak. Green Bay, I'm not going to say they're going through the motions necessarily, but they've sort of adopted kind of that Kansas City mold of, you know what, we're just going to win. I don't know if we're really that worried about covering.
Well, maybe I think I'm right. Maybe please let me know if I'm wrong. Green Bay had the tiebreaker over New Orleans, right, going into last week.
I believe so, yeah.
So even if Green Bay were to lose this, they're still the 1 seed.
Right. Yeah, Green Bay beat the Saints earlier in the year.
Oh, there you go. So it's a 2-game lead. So it's not the end of the world. if Green Bay loses this game. But, they'll know where they stand because the New Orleans-Minnesota game will be over. But Tennessee's the one, though, fighting for the division lead. I'd have a slight lean to Tennessee in this spot. And I think the deciding factor for me, I think across the board, the AFC is better than the NFC. And I think the records prove that out. I think the way we've watched these games when these teams play head to head, I think the AFC is a deeper, better conference. And it may be that simple to make a decision on the side.
Lastly, Bills Patriots Monday Night Football here. Bills 7-point road favorite against New England. I'm not even going to try and find the last time that happened for Buffalo on the road at Fox.
I never thought he'd say it.
Maybe it never has. I don't know. Well, it probably did back in like the early 90s, I would say. But Buffalo, they finish off the AFC East. Good for them. They don't really have a shot at the number 1 seed. Kansas City should take care of that. Maybe it's better for Buffalo to finish second instead of third, but, or fourth, I guess, as the case would be. What do you think about them here, though, laying this big number on the road at Foxborough?
Well, you would look at this and say this is the letdown spot to the moon for the Bills. They win the division, first time in 25 years. Fly home, 10,000 people are at the airport cheering them on when they get home. But I do think, even though this is the official passing of the torch, they've won the AFC East, I think there's a part of me says they want to still be the one to drive a stake in New England's heart. The one gray area here, I like the over. All right, I think you play the Bills in the first half because Allen and those guys will be out there. Then they could pull them out, and the Bills have been printing money by having the lead at the break. But I like the over in the game. I've yet to hear it announced, but I mean, as smart as Belichick is, he can't be stubborn enough, can he, to play Newton in this game? I mean, does he want to go through this again next year? And I'm not blaming Cam Newton. I mean, the wide receivers just aren't open. But wouldn't you use these 2 games, if you're Belichick, to see what you've got in Stidham? Because Stidham was going to be their starter, and at the 11th hour, they get Cam Newton, and he gets the job, and Belichick's, I think, gets sucked into Brady's gone, and we can still make the playoffs, but I'm going to go with the veteran quarterback. Well, it didn't work. Okay, it's not the end of the world, but these are the Patriots. This is, foreign territory to them. But if you were Belichick, would you not throw Stidham in there for these last 2 games? Let me see what I'm dealing with here for this kid, because Brady never came out of football games. Give this kid 2 games, see what you got, so you can make a plan for next year. So I've got to believe you see Stidham in this game. And I do think the Bills will rest people in the second half. The first go-around, the Patriots can't stop the run. The first game, Diggs and Moss had 190 yards rushing on them. I think the Bills' offense, and I think New England's a little deflated too, I think the Bills' offense is going to produce points. But if you see Stidham in this game, I think the Patriots will get points because I think the Bills start resting guys in the second half. I like the Bills in the first half, and I like the game over.
Biggest road favorite role at Foxborough for the Bills since 1993. First time favored on the road against the Patriots since 1999, which, of course, not really a huge surprise with something that looks like that. Yeah,
and I can say with certainty that I was at that game.
All right, there you go.
No, I've covered the Bills for 14 years. I was at every. So I was up at Foxborough, and I mean, my God, I go all the way back to Schaefer Stadium.
Well, I agree with everything you said, too. I mean, I think that you've got to start looking maybe at some of the derivatives here over the last couple of weeks. Maybe you want to look at first halves, expecting these teams, to ensure that their players stay in rhythm. They play the first half. They get them the hell out of there. I think that's something that definitely makes a lot of sense. Or if nothing else, Buffalo needs to throw the football. The running game sort of has bright spots here and there, but this offense goes through Josh Allen and that passing game. In the second half, Allen might drop back and throw when he absolutely has to. They'll try to force feed the run, let the clock run on this game, especially if they have a big lead, stuff like that. You have to think about game state here and about sort of what these teams are going to do in the second half if they've got these leads, if they're comfortably ahead, whether it's rest players or just have an altogether different script for the game. So I agree with you in terms of derivative betting, first and second half plays, live betting opportunities, stuff like that. Very good approach here over weeks 16 and 17.
Well, I'm just looking at their schedule, and I'm going from memory, and I'm 90% right. I'm convinced I'm right on this, that I think you can go all the way back to November 1st, and the Bills have had the lead in every game since then at the half. New England, Seattle, Arizona, the Chargers, the Niners. They were lucky to get the lead at the half against the Steelers. They had a pick six for a touchdown in the final minute of the first half, would put them ahead, and then they murdered Denver. The Bills have had the lead going to the locker room absolutely in their last 2, 4, 7 games. Their last 7, at least. And it may be, and then the going to the beginning of the season, it may be even more than that. But they're on a 7-game streak at least of having the lead at the break. So, lay the whatever it is. Probably, I think it'll be 4. Probably -4 in the first half.
Yeah, it sounds like it. 3.5 with juice or 4, something like that. Lots of good insights on today's show with Brian Blessing, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline. And Brian, how can people check out those 2 shows of yours?
All right, bud. Yeah, thank you. We're going to be we're on the Sports Grid Radio Network, and that's going to be debuting on Sirius 204 starting January 7th. And I'm doing an extra hour a day for them. So let's see, we'll rattle this off. From 11 to 1 Pacific time, I'm on the Sports Grid Radio Network with Sportsbook Radio. We do an extra hour now for them. And then we're on kshp.com where there's a listen live function. And then every day at 1 p.m. Pacific time, we do Vegas Hockey Hotline, which has been, we've soldiered through the whole pandemic. And now we're actually talking about honest to God hockey, which is exciting. And you get everything on my Twitter at Brian Blessing. And usually you join me on Tuesdays, but we're going to get a little holiday stuff going on this week. So we'll get you back on the beam next week. But, a lot of stuff going on. Excited the hockey's coming back too.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty of great stuff going on Brian's Twitter page at Brian Blessing. And make sure you check out his videos for us over on our ATS YouTube page. Brian, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Merry Christmas to you and yours, bud. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Adam, you and your family, we love doing this each and every week with you. It's good stuff. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, bud.
There you go. There's Brian Blessing again at Brian Blessing. Sportsbook Radio, Vegas Hockey Hotline. Make sure you check out Sportsbook Radio on that Sports Grid Radio Network. Coming up on our Wednesday edition of the show, we'll chat with professional bettor and handicapper Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Half college football, half college basketball on tomorrow's show. Thursday, Brad Powers will join me for some college football and some NFL talk. And then Friday, probably going to try to record Thursday night, not to, get involved with the Christmas holiday there, with my Week 16 picks for the Circus Sports Million, 42, 32, and 1 on the season now. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.